This session is tips and tricks for developing and debugging apps. I'm Kelly Hutchins. I work on the JavaScript team and also ArcGIS Online. And this is my co-presenter, Heather Gonzago.
I'm also a product engineer with the JavaScript API. Okay.
So the general idea for this session is we want to talk about some tips and tricks that we think are helpful to us when working with the JavaScript API. So I think it's primarily targeted at people who maybe have just started working with JavaScript or just started working with the JavaScript API. So how many of you in here are new to working with JavaScript in general, HTML, CSS? A couple people? How about new to the JavaScript API? A couple people? Okay, all right. So the way this session is going to go is first we're going to talk briefly about setting up your development environment, some tricks that we use. Do a quick intro to the browser developer tools. How many people in here already use Chrome Dev Tools, Firefox tools? Yeah, so you guys probably already know everything we're going to talk about. We'll see. And Heather's going to show you some common gotchas. So some of the things that we see come in frequently through support issues or questions that we get asked on GeoNet. So some of the issues that are, everybody runs into and how you fix them. And then finally, we'll do some more dev tool tips. First thing in the JavaScript world is if you're coming from another language, maybe you worked with Flex or C# or Visual Basic.NET, is that there's no sort of one environment. You can choose whichever development environment you want. Everything from Notepad, if you want, you can develop JavaScript in Notepad, to something more full-featured like WebStorm or Visual Studio Code. When I started on the team, since then, in the time I've been on, I've probably gone through 10 different my favorite IDEs of choice. For a while, I loved Notepad++, and then Sublime Text, and then Brackets, and then Atom, and now I'm using Visual Studio Code, but sometimes I still use Sublime. It really depends what mood I'm in. But there are some things that I kind of look for in the development environment to make my life easier. One of the big ones are syntax highlighting, right? Does your code look like code? You don't get that in Notepad. Everything's the same color. It doesn't make it easy to read your code. It doesn't make it easy to find issues. Another thing I like is code hinting, and I'll show you an example of what that is and what it looks like in a little bit. If you work with GitHub, Git integration is nice. You can stay within your development environment, get stuff checked in out of GitHub. Task integration, I think, is also nice. Does anybody here use TypeScript, CSS preprocessors like less or sass, gulp or grunt to do tasks? So integration with those in your development environment is also something that's nice to look for. I found this page the other day when I was putting together this session about what are the best JavaScript IDE or editors, and I thought it illustrates the kind of choices that you have. And if you don't already have a favorite environment, it's worth downloading a couple of these. Most of them have free trials. A lot of them are just free in general. Try it out, see if it has features that you like. Maybe you'll use it for a few months and then move on to something else. One thing that I liked about this is that if you click on one of these recommended products, so in this case Visual Studio Code, it sort of has the specs and then it has the pros and the cons. So some of the pros are integrated debugging and JavaScript IntelliSense. Some of the cons are just certain things that people found didn't work, slow launch time, some issues with Sass linting. So I thought this was a nice overview of some of the more popular JavaScript code editors and IDEs. Good way to get started. Well, let's show you some of these other things that I talked about. So I'm going to just show you in Visual Studio Code, which I've been using lately. I have another. One of the things I mentioned that I like lately is custom task integration. So, if you're working with Sass, you have your Sass file, you need to compile it to CSS when you're developing. Sometimes, I have gulp task or grunt task that will do that for me. In Visual Studio, you can just set up a command that you can run. So the way I'm going to run it is I just have this command palette. So view command palette, we have a list of tasks. I could just run a build task, and it's going to run this task that's configured in this task.json file. And all that I'm doing is I'm running node Sass and saying, hey, take this main.css, SCSS file and convert it to main.css. So that's a really easy way of working with CSS preprocessor. You can also run gulp and grunt through this integrated task automation. Close this one. Another thing that I really like about some IDEs are plugins. So in Visual Studio, I use a few plugins. One of them I use will beautify my code. So if you're like me, you might start out writing a few lines of code and then you're like, I bet somebody's done this already. So you go find a code sample somewhere, you copy that code, paste it into your app, maybe change some variable names, but eventually your code starts to look like this, right? Everything is just sort of out of whack, your brackets don't line up, it's really hard to know, is this, what's it associated with? I can't read my code anymore. So I have a beautify add-in in a lot of development environments. All the ones I mentioned, Sublime, Atom, Brackets, Visual Studio Code, have these plugins for beautifying. So when I save my app, it magically beautifies it and makes everything look pretty again. All my indentation is good, my brackets line up, and I'm good to go. So I just think it makes it much easier to read your code when it looks pretty. And the other thing is our JavaScript code is always visible. Somebody just views source, and I just think it looks neater and cleaner when it's prettified. So that's one of the plugins I use a lot. Another thing that I like is, well, it's not true in IntelliSense. A lot of these IDEs have code hinting, or they become smarter about what you're typing. So they can help you prevent errors. So here, if I start typing, it comes up with a list of suggestions for me. So it's like in IntelliSense. It knows that I have these this class called home already in my application, and it brings it up. So it can reduce the amount of typing you have to do, and more importantly, help prevent spelling errors. So I like that as well. The other thing that's useful is something like JSHint or JSLint. Anybody in here already used those? Good. Okay, everybody probably should. It finds and fixes problems in your code, common themes, trailing commas, missing semicolons, variables that you've declared but never used. So for example, let's get rid of that semicolon. As soon as I got rid of that semicolon, I don't know if you can see down here, but there's this little exclamation point with the 2 problems, and it tells me that I have 2 problems in my app. So JSHint found 2 problems. One of them is a missing semicolon. So that's great. I can just fix it. That problem goes away. And another one tells me I have this variable search defined but never used. In this case, I'm creating a widget, not a big deal, so I don't have to worry about it. But it lets me know that I have these problems in my code. If you're using JSHint or JSLint, these work off a resource file or a hint file that you can put in your application directory or your web server root directory, and these plugins will read that to see the options that you care about. If you want an example of what one of these looks like, you can go to the Esri GitHub JSAPI resources page, and there's a JSHint folder, and inside of that is this .jshint.rc file, and I just put mine in my web server root directory, and then all my projects in that file use that same thing. But if you click on it, you'll see that this is the one that people on the JavaScript team use, and you can see there are a lot of options you can read through and see what all of these mean and see if you care about. Like, I think one of the things it cares about is always using single quotes versus always using double quotes. Some people care about that, some people don't. If you care about it, you flag that as true. If you don't care about it, you set it to false and do what you want in your app. But it's a nice way if you work with a team of people to agree on a set of style rules, set them in this file, and then use JSHint to enforce those rules so that your project and your code style looks kind of the same as other developers in your team. It makes it easier to mix and match and read each other's code. So Heather, do you have any favorite plugins that you use or helpful tips in IDE?
There's one that we just started. I just found out about it. Maybe it's been around for a while, but I'm behind the curve on it.
We're not showing you.
3, yeah. You guys see it? Editor config. Anybody heard of editor config? Well, it's a config file that you can create and work with within your IDEs. Just editorconfig.org basically just allows, like it says here, it allows your developers to define and maintain a consistent coding style. So our developers on the JavaScript team actually use this as well, because we have some guys that, strictly WebStorm. We have other guys that use Visual Studio Code. Adam, they're all over the place. So basically, it's just a way, again, to just maintain that consistent style. We use it as well within our team with the product engineers when building the SDK to try to, again, no trailing white space, a bunch of other things as well. So for example, if I go into, this is kind of funny here, as Kelly was saying, she goes between different IDEs. No joke, within one day I can open up brackets, Visual Studio Code, and Atom. I have them all here docked. It's weird. It just really depends on what I'm in the mood to do or work with that day. So in this particular case, I have this, there are some IDEs where I believe the editor config automatically is just recognized if you add that file in there. In Visual Studio Code, you just have to run, it's like a really simple extension that you just go in and you run. I have it. There we go. There we go. So I basically have it enabled for this IDE, and then again, it's a very basic installation process. But if we went in here and we took an actual look, I'm just going to go in and just very quickly show you. If I just notice how it automatically strips all of that out. If I took that editor config file out of there, you'll have a bunch of white space. So just tiny little things, but it can really help in the long run make things a whole lot easier. Alrighty. I think that was the big one that I wanted to show.
Excellent.
So,
can you flip me back?
Yep.
Okay, so now I just want to talk briefly about these dev tools. I mentioned them earlier. It sounds like most of you are already using them. That's great. Developer tools are browser-based tools that help you inspect things like CSS in your application, look at elements, do some quick and dirty responsive app testing, mobile testing, look at network traffic, inspect performance. There's a lot that you can do there. And if you're not already using these, it's worth spending a little bit of time becoming familiar with the tools. All the browsers have them. I just realized I forgot Internet Explorer from this list, but Edge is up here. They have browser-based developer tools. Some browsers have specific developer editions. Firefox has it. I have both regular Firefox and Firefox Developer Edition installed for use. Google Chrome has Google Chrome and Google Chrome Canary, which is like experimental. Theoretically, it could crash more. I like to check it out every once in a while and see what's happening. So as I mentioned earlier, we have things like a developer console. We can do debugging. We can look at network traffic. We can inspect CSS and a bunch more. So let's just really quickly look at one or two of the things that we can do. We'll see more of this stuff later on. Do I have a demo? No. Let's open up. Just going to open up this app in the browser. And I happen to have Chrome open. It could have done this in any of the other browsers I mentioned as well. So here, to open the developer tools, I just go to Tools, Developer Tools. And you can see we have a lot of things. We have elements. This lets us interact with pieces of HTML in our app. So I can click on some element, or I can even right-click on an element in the page and inspect it. And so here we're looking at the title. It highlights that. I can see all the styles associated with that. I can make temporary changes to them and see how they look. You can come to the developer console and you can actually write JavaScript here. I'll show you an example of that later that interacts with our application. So that's a nice feature. Sources is also really useful. It's where we can look at the source code in our application. So here I can go to the main.js file. I can actually create breakpoints, run my application. It'll stop when it hits that breakpoint and let me step through the code, inspect variable values, interact with the application that way. Network lets you look at all the network traffic. We'll see more examples of this later too. So if we actually rerun this, there's my breakpoint. Let's get rid of that. Rerun it, we can see our network traffic. We can look at all the requests that were made regarding this app. Somewhere in here, I think there's a query, so we can look at that query and see more information about what's going on. We have timeline and profiles. We have security, which is nice. It tells me this page is not secure. I'm not running over HTTPS. There are audits that we can run to look at our network utilization, our page performance, accessibility. If you have to worry about WCAG or 508 compliance, then accessibility audit's great, a great tool that you can run from within the browser as well. So that's just a quick overview. We're going to look at more of this as we go through our presentation. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Heather to show you some common gotchas when you're working with the JavaScript API and sort of how you can use things like the developer tools and the IDEs to find and fix those problems.
Okay, so some of these, you guys might be like, yeah, okay, that's that on. Where even the most experienced developer, I think, it can just stand to have a little refresher as well to just, all right, yeah, I forgot about the missing CSS stuff that can come across sometimes, or my module order or so forth. So a lot of these we see, Kelly and I way back in the day, I mean a long time ago, used to work in support. So a lot of it was just doing the basic troubleshooting, trying to figure out, stripping down your applications, trying to figure, it's like peeling an onion, trying to figure out exactly where the problem is coming from. So we still kind of never got away from a lot of those support days. I handle a lot of the escalations and the questions and the bugs that come through, and you'd be surprised at a lot of times how many of the things are really pretty basic, straightforward things that could probably have been nipped in the bud before it went up the chain of command, if they just did some basic troubleshooting. So one of the first things that we see a lot, and this is for a newbie and for experienced developers, I catch myself doing this sometimes as well. Who, when you first started, you start playing around with the samples, maybe you downloaded them, put it into like a local file, like a temp directory. You try to double click on your index HTML and nothing happens, or you get like weird results, errors, whatever. A lot of times that's because you're trying to access it directly through your file server. It's not enabled for web access. So it's not from your actual web server itself. So for example, I'm gonna open this one, Safari. I'm not seeing a whole lot, right? I've got my CSS, I've got my zoom in and zoom out, but nothing else. So if I open up my developer tools, I've got a whole bunch of failed to load resources. And it's pointing to file server.arcgis online. Basically, it's trying to find the services for my file. Of course, it's not there. So if once I would go ahead and copy that over into my into a folder that's enabled for web access, you should be good to go. Should be fine. So pretty straightforward. The second one we see quite often is the missing CSS. So in this case, it doesn't look too weird. Sometimes what you'll see is like scattered tiles showing up. Generally that's going to indicate that it's not finding your CSS files. Maybe you misspelled it wrong or whatever it may be. In this case, we have the tiles, but we're not getting the like the components and everything that come along with that main CSS. So we're not getting our attribution at the bottom. We're not getting that zoom in and zoom out button that we would expect. So if we go in, take a look at this. I just have it commented out. Does everything look all right? I'm always afraid I'm going to miss a bracket or something. Go back in, and let's hope it's not. There we go. As you can see, now we're getting our zoom in, zoom outs, we have our attribution, and so forth. All right, so we're kind of building along here. Next one is our missing module. So, you know, maybe you're picking pieces of code from various samples, writing some on your own. This happens, I do this all the time. You go in, you're writing everything up, and you realize as you're running it that, let's open up the dev tools, we'll take a look at the console. You weren't joking where this is kind of a painful. Just go there. Uncaught reference error, SceneView is not defined. So if we take a look at, take a look here within my code, we are working with a SceneView, but, oops, in this case I have it commented out. I actually went ahead and declared the map view to work with the map view instead. So, actually we'll keep that in there, comment that out, put SceneView back in, save that. And now everything works as it should. All right, we've got our SceneView. So very basic. I mean, in this case, I was just missing the require statement, but again, it's a common one. A lot of people do it. Just little things, right? This is one of the biggest ones, I think, especially if you're just starting. Before I came to the JavaScript team, I used to work with Flex, so I kind of had a bit of a learning curve as well. I can remember, because Kelly's complete old school JavaScript, she's been on the team for so long, I remember calling her, like maybe within the first month, practicing some of the samples and being like, I have no idea what I'm doing wrong. I'm looking at this, it looks fine to me, like just, I'm going crazy. I'm spending like 2 hours on this, right? She looks at it for a second and she's like, all right, yeah, Heather, your module's out of order. And she's laughing at me and I'm like, okay, I just spun my wheels for 2 hours and feel like a ding dong, but okay, I learned something new. And ever since then, I'll tell you though, it's one of the first things I check. So you're gonna get, usually it's that uncaught type error, like just it's not a function. If you see that, generally that means your module order, it's out of sync. So what I mean when I say that is if you take a look, this is that code for that, that sample that we were just looking at. Goodness gracious, get in there. You take a look here. We have, we are requiring the map layer, map view, DOM, so forth. In the function, you actually need to pass it in the same exact way that you have set up here. So my map, my layer, my map view. I've got map, map view, layer. So I just need to switch these guys around. All right, let's try this again. There you go. Easy enough, but if you're someone like me and, you know, it's like, I will figure this out. I'm not going to ask anybody for help. I can do this. This cannot be that difficult. And after 2 hours, you realize I need some help. This cannot be this difficult. And I realize, all right, that's all it is. Easy enough, right? So a little tip, but it'll save you a lot of headache.
My theory is that if you look at GeoNet often enough, I think you could become probably MVP from answering that question alone. That's just my theory. Someone has to try it out.
All right, so another one, the locate. So this is kind of new. I actually, in this code, I'll go ahead and open it up so I'll show you guys. I'm working with the locate widget. All right, so basically what that locate widget is, click on the locate widget. It allows you to access your latitude, longitude, coordinate location as long as you give it the okay to do so. So in this case, I'm not seeing anything, all right? Well, what's the reason behind that? Well, I'm hosting this application through HTTP, all right? Well, actually, before I even do that, I should probably take a quick look here. I'm gonna hold on a second, guys. I got a little ahead of myself there. That's the mixed content. Okay, sorry. Thought I was looking at the wrong one. Okay, yeah. So I'm accessing that application through HTTP. So what I need to do in this case, and this isn't going to tell me a whole lot, all right, requires a secure origin. All right, so at least we have a little bit of a warning here that's letting me know, hey, it requires a secure origin. I know I'm not secure. Okay, this page is not secure. So if I go in here, I don't have this particular machine set up for HTTPS right now. I did some monkeying with it and I just didn't get a chance to put it back. But what you could do, just if you're developing, you can go in here and set it to localhost or HTTPS. And the widget should pop in for you. And I need to give it the okay. Yeah, cool. I'm in the conference center. All right, so next one. Is there anything new that you guys have learned? It's just totally old, like just simple, like you guys are like, yeah, okay, we've got all this. Maybe just a little refresher. Hopefully if it's anything, you guys will just be like, oh yes, I remember that. All right, spelling and casing. Again, this is, you know, beating, don't mind the expression, beating the horse here, but this is, I mean, honestly, you would think it would be pretty straightforward. You need to make sure that you have things spelled correctly, and you need to make sure you stay consistent with your casing. But again, not everybody does that, right? So especially if maybe you're not using an IDE that can catch all of that for you, you know, maybe your code helpers, or if you're typing things in manually. So in this case, nothing's showing up for me. I want to take a look and I want to see why. So I'm getting this uncaught reference error. Init camera is not defined. All right, so I'm going to take a look and see what this init camera actually is. All right, so I just searched for init camera. I don't know if you guys can see this back there, but the one thing that comes, what I can see is there is camel casing. I don't have this init camera should be a lowercase c. Save that, we're gonna try that again. All right, so it comes in, but I know what this application is supposed to do and I'm not actually seeing it. I'm supposed to have this base map guy come up here and it's still not coming in. So I'm really not getting any good error messages in this case. So this is probably gonna be one of those instances where it's just gonna be some sleuthing, going into your code and taking a look around. One thing, so I know where it is. We have this stamen, this variable called stamen that represents the space map. I have this code helper, right? So maybe when I was writing this out super fast, I wasn't paying any attention. Maybe I copied and pasted. I had it spelled with an I beforehand. Who knows? Now I know. I can say, okay, that's wrong. I need to go in there, take a look and see. Save it out. Load it. Now I got everything the way it's supposed to be. Okay. All right. Mixed content. This is a goodie. We get this all the time, especially if you're bringing things in. I see this a lot. If you're bringing things in from like web maps, from ArcGIS Online or Portal, and you might have them secured, and you're playing around and practicing. You have stuff on your own development machine, and maybe it's not secured. You'll get those mixed error messages. This one's not. This one's fixed. This one is not. So this is hosted off of a GitHub site. And you see I don't have anything, right? So why? You guys see, you ever get this? Mixed content error messages, yeah? The page of this was loaded over HTTPS, but requested an insecure style sheet, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times, you can see here, so I know that I'm hosting this from a secure site, but if I took a look at the actual code in it, yeah, you'll see here that I'm actually referencing our API and our CSS files with an insecure, using HTTP. All right, so just change that out and we should get it looking not like that. We should get it looking like what I had up before. Sorry, guys. All right, I added a couple on this as well just recently because I had a couple questions come in. We get a lot just things on the feedback site. I don't know if you guys ever noticed, if you go to our SDK documentation, we have little links at the bottom like provide feedback. Sometimes it's mainly just like, hey, this has been updated. You're not providing enough documentation, or maybe the documentation needs to be tweaked a little bit, or hey, maybe the sample just isn't working anymore. All that stuff is definitely useful and we sorely need it, so please continue to provide that. We also get a lot of times like, hey, I'm trying to use the sample on my machine, I downloaded it from this, or I copied it from the sandbox, and it's not working right. A prime example is when you're trying to access it using a proxy. Things like directions, where you need to actually provide credentials to get to that. We have a proxy that we host so that people can actually go in and play around with this stuff, right? But if you copy that, you're not going to have access to our sproxy file. So in this case, if I try to get some routes, nothing's going to happen. Take a look at the code, and it's going to tell me basically it can't find, if I can ever open this up, I'm having issues with all of this right now. Sorry guys. It's going to tell me that it can't find this sproxy file. So if I go back in, take a look at the code, you should see I don't have an sproxy. That was left over from the sample that I copied. So if I get rid of that and I point to a proxy on my machine that I know I have access to and I've set up for so that I can get to the route task service. Go in there, resave that, try it again, fingers crossed, come on. There we go.
There it goes.
Did it come in?
Yeah.
Oh, it did. It was just a little slow?
Yeah.
Okay. I was too hasty. There we go. Okay, so that works. All right, and then lastly, one of the things I wanted to show was, if I get back to where I was, sorry guys. One of the things that I wanted to show was a lot of times we get a lot of questions that come in regarding printing. And how we're not seeing what we expect to see on our printouts. You know, it worked fine in, I don't know. It worked fine in back in the day when I worked with ArcMap or whatever it may be. But we're not seeing what the expected results are. So usually the very, very first thing, because the thing is we have multiple, I'm sorry guys, I'm trying to get back to my little cheat sheet here. I closed everything down, so I don't want to get myself too lost. One of the very first things that, when you're working with printing is that you have a couple things you have to take into equation. You've got the API, you've got the client side stuff, right? But all we're doing is we're just in the print, the print functionality is just calling this export web map task on the server side. So we need to figure out whether or not the problem is directly in the API or if the problem is with the map server. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will take a look at the request that goes on in. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through everything here. But what I really wanted to show you, and this kind of goes for other things too, not just the export web map task. Kelly showed you, and you might even go into an example, working with things like queries and so forth. You can open up the services directory. Okay, And in this case, we have this execute task. And all we're doing when we, I'm just gonna throw something in here quick. It's super ugly, but that's okay. Oops, wrong one. All right. When we run this, if we look at the network tab, we should see, you can find it, there. We should see this header information that gets sent through on the execute call. We'll see this web map as JSON, okay? So this huge JSON string is what gets passed in to this web map as JSON, this parameter here. You pass in that format, you pass in the layout template. So you can actually go in here, copy this information, and there's a lot, take the format and then specify the template, okay? What I was trying to show you in this particular example is that there's a known limit or a known issue right now with how transparency gets passed over. Some of you guys may already even be familiar with this. And one of the things I get a lot is like we'll get these bugs that come through, and what I'll say is, okay, we need to take this out of JavaScript and actually see whether or not this is something on the map server end. So I'll run it from here directly through the services directory, and I take a look to see what the resulting, in that case, would be like a PDF file, and you'll see then that basically those symbols show up without the transparency. So it is a log bug. It's something that they are aware of and actively looking at. But again, it's something where, especially for GeoNet posts, it's a great forum. It's a great place to get information from. But that's also, that's the type of stuff that people are going to ask you to do to kind of troubleshoot and figure out where the problems might be coming from. So that was lengthy, and I appreciate your patience, and I'm sorry if I made some of you guys glaze over because I know it may have been old hat, but I think it's important to kind of even just refresh some of the basics. So, yeah.
Excellent. Can you put it back on 4? Awesome. Thanks, Heather. So now we're going to go a little bit more detail into the browser-based developer tools. First one I want to talk about again is the console. I mentioned earlier that we can actually type JavaScript in there. It's a great place to log diagnostic information. So you've all probably written in your code somewhere console.log, check the value of a variable or an object, or just, hey, we got here, right? Just to see if you got to a particular line, which is great. I do that all the time. But you can also actually write code. So let's look at this application here. It's just a map, pretty simple. But one of the things, I'm lazy, I don't like to type, I certainly don't like to figure out the extent if I want my map to start at a default extent or a default lat lon. Sometimes it's easier just to open up a map, zoom into the area I want, then I can come to the console, and if I have a global variable, in this case my view is global, I can say this.view.extent, hit return, and it shows it to me, but it's an object, I have to drill into it. Here I can see the extent, drill into that. I can look at the xmin, ymin, xmax, and ymax, and I can copy those values out. Or I can just say json.stringify, so this is just JavaScript, this.view.extent, and now it gives it to me in a nice little string that I can copy with the spatial reference and everything. But this is in Web Mercator, and what if I wanted it in geographic? I have to write a little bit more code to take the Web Mercator coordinates and convert them to geographic, and I think I already mentioned that I was lazy. So I could paste the code in here. I have some code already saved on my clipboard, so I can paste the code I need in here. I pasted it in there. I can hit return, and it gives me those values in geographic. I think my font's really small in there, so I'm sorry if it's hard to see, but we're looking at the coordinates in geographic now. But again, I'm lazy, so let's see if there's another way we can do this and not have to copy paste that all the time. And in Chrome DevTools there is, under the Sources tab, there's this snippet section, and I can actually create a snippet. I can paste some code in there that I want to use frequently from the console, and then whenever I want to run it, I can just hit run, and it runs it and gives me that value. So this is useful for common bits of code that you might want to run when you're debugging and testing your app from within the developer console. The next thing that's useful is inspecting the network traffic. Heather showed you this, but we'll look at it again just because I use it all the time. I think it's really useful. So here we're looking at a globe. Let's open those developer tools again. This time we'll go to the network tab. And I'm going to filter. You can filter the requests. I want to look at the XHR requests. And then I'm going to start typing an address. So let's say I want to zoom to Palm Springs. And I select one of the options. If we look at the network requests, we can see a few things. There are a few suggest requests that went through. So Heather showed you that you can look at the headers, and we can see that there are some query stream parameters. Basically, when I started typing PA, it sent PA to suggest, and it said, hey, give me back a maximum of 6 suggestions. So then if I look at the response, we can actually open this up in a new tab if we want to look at it in a prettier format. So it starts giving me back all those suggestions for the 2 letters that I typed. If I went to the next one, opened it in a new tab, now it's giving me back more specific suggestions because I've typed a few more letters. So that's some of the network traffic. It's going, making queries again, suggest to say, hey, now we have, how many letters do we have here? Now our text is Palm Springs, so it's actually going to give me back more accurate suggestions. And then finally, when I selected an item from the list, it ran this find address candidates. Let's see if I can make this bigger. The query stream parameters it sent in were the address, the spatial reference information, the outfields that we want back. And I can look at the response again. If I want to look at that in a prettier format, I can open it in a new tab, and this is the information that it actually found when I selected Palm Springs from the list, so it knows to zoom to it. So this can be a nice troubleshooting tool because you can actually look at what information is being sent to the address locator. If your address doesn't look right here, sometimes this can be easier than looking at your code. I just look at the query stream parameters, and maybe they're wrong. Maybe this address isn't correct. Or if it's a query task, maybe my query isn't correct. Then I know that there's something wrong with my code and I can go fix it. But this is a really easy way for me to diagnose that problem. Let's see if we can look at it here too. I think we've got maybe a query going on here, maybe not. So we have here's a query task, same thing, network request. In this case, our where clause is pretty simple, where 1 equals 1. We're just trying to get everything, right? But it shows us that where clause. So if you're missing a quote in your where clause, or if there's a typo in your where clause, or if it just doesn't look right, this is a great place to look at it. And again, we can see the response. We also can sort of shortcut to the services directory that Heather mentioned earlier, which is a great debugging tool. So I right-clicked on that request, opened it in a new tab, then I come up here in the URL, and where it says query f equals JSON, I just changed that to f equals HTML, and I'm at the services directory. It has the inputs that I specified already in here, they're 1 equals 1, and it shows me the results. So sometimes you get 0 results back here, but your inputs are in here, and you could just make a tweak, and it would get you the right answer, and then you can go back and fix your code. So I use this all the time. Like if we were looking for where city equals Palm Springs, but there was something wrong with our query, and we ran it, and it didn't give us any results, we could play around with it here sometimes in this services directory until we get it right, and then update our code. So I find it a helpful troubleshooting tip. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. Oops, looks like I've got a messed up slide here, but there's 2 things we're going to talk about next. One is copying an image. Sometimes we want our image copied as a data URI. So maybe you're pulling an image from another project or another website in your organization. There are online converters that will take that and convert it to a data URI, but you can do it in the developer tools. So here I'm going to run this page. I'm going to go back to my network tab, same thing. I'm going to filter the request this time by images, and we'll click on one of these. There's this little throbbing, spinning icon. I can look at the preview. If I right-click on that preview, here I can copy that either image URL directly or copy that image as data URI, and then I'll paste it just so you can see what that looks like, right? a base 64 image. So that's a nice way to quickly copy that. Debugging. Most of you probably already know how to set breakpoints and step through the code, but I'm just going to show you really quickly. Under sources, I mentioned earlier, we can actually look at our JavaScript files. We can set breakpoints. So here, let's say I really just want to see what's happening. My app's not loading, and I really want to know what's happening at this location. I can just click over here in this gray area that sets a breakpoint, rerun the app, stops when it hits that breakpoint, and now I can inspect the value of variables, so I can see what the view is at this point. I could drill down and look at the value of various variable or properties on that view. I can actually come over here and watch variables. So if I wanted to keep an eye on this view as it was going through, I can add it to the watch. If I could type. I could add that, and then as I run my application, I could see what happens to this view object over here. You can look at local and global variables over here and see their current state as the application is stopped right now. You can also look at the call stack and drill into the call stack and see how that looks. We can step into our code, so we can step into it here and see what's going on, and then finish execution. So I think that breakpoint debugging is really useful. You can set conditional breakpoints. You can temporarily stop the breakpoints. There's a bunch of stuff you can do with them. It's worth spending a little bit of time in the help. All of these development environments have good help on their specific browser sites that will explain more about this than we can do in 1 hour. CSS, I use this, I don't know, all the time, every single day. Let's look at an app. I have this app here, the Park Locator. Let's say I'm developing this and I have a coworker who's willing to help me out, and I'm not a designer, but I want to make this app look better, and I just don't like the way it looks, and I want to make some changes to it. One thing I can do is I can have my code open, I can make changes in the code, refresh the page, see how they look, update my code, back and forth, back and forth. Or I can just get that coworker like Heather to come stand over my shoulder, and I can start playing around with it in the development environment and get it the way I look, and then port those changes back over to my source code. So let's say I want to change the color of this title, maybe make it a little bit bolder or bigger. I can right click and inspect. And I can come over here. Here's the element, the title. Here are the CSS styles associated with it. So let's say I want to change the color to aqua, but whoa, that looks really bad. So I can click on this little color icon. I can use this little eyedropper to pick another color from someplace in my app. Maybe I want to take this orange color and see how that looks. It's because it's a color I already use in my app. Maybe I know the hex code for another value, and I can use that. Or choose one of these material design colors that come in Chrome. So maybe I like that red color. Heather says she thinks it looks great. I could change the font weight to be bold. I could change the font size to be a little bigger. So you can just tweak your app, on the fly. Just make little modifications. And then when I have this looking the way I want, I can just copy it and paste it back into my source code. Because I haven't changed anything in my source code, as soon as I refresh the page, all those updates are gone. They're just a nice temporary way to play around with it. I also use it if I want to find out the class name of a widget that I want to modify. So here, let's say I wanted to change something about this base map toggle widget. It's in the JavaScript API. I could just right click and inspect it. And maybe I want to, I don't know, remove the box shadow on the thumbnail image and see how that looks. Or change the color of the box shadow. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but the bottom of that satellite image is a tiny purple line. Maybe I wanted to make it a lot bigger. I'm going to make this look really bad. So there, we've made this bigger box shadow. Or maybe I don't want to modify it at all. I just want to get the name of the class that's associated with it and then go back to my source and make changes there. So this tells me that if I want to change the box shadow, this is the associated class. I can copy it, paste it into my application, and add my CSS. All right. Really quickly, because we're running out of time, let's add some stuff to storage. So anybody work with local storage, cookies, session storage, any of that stuff? Probably, yeah, in your apps. The developer tools provide a really easy way to look at that stuff, to clear that stuff. If you come under application, we can look and see the storage. So I can look into local storage and see the local storage values I have associated with that page. I like that I can just quickly delete them here. So I can delete local storage, rerun my app as if I hadn't already been there, and I'm sort of starting from scratch. Same thing with session storage, and same thing with cookies. So I use this all the time to delete a cookie if I want to look and see how my app's supposed to behave when the cookie's not there versus when the cookie is there. So I think this is a really nice shortcut. And maybe I don't always want to clear my cache. I just want to delete the cookie and test something. It's nice to be able to responsively test our apps and remotely debug them. So if we look at this app, I'm going to refresh to get rid of my box shadow changes. So in the developer tools, this is Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari. They all have these capabilities as well. Here we can toggle. And now we are in device emulation mode. It's a quick and dirty way for testing how your app looks at various responsive breakpoints and on various devices. So I can look at this on iPhone 6 and see if it looks the way I expect it to look, and on various devices and see if my app is looking the way I expect, if I have my breakpoint set up correctly, if things are moving around and positioning themselves the way that they should. Another thing I like in this mode, and maybe it's just because I have to do presentations all the time, but sorry, let me go back to that mode, is that there's this little 3 ellipses up here, more options. One of them is that you can add a device frame, so it puts the frame around that. And then I can also capture a screenshot. So I click capture a screenshot, and now I have a screenshot on my desktop of that site inside that device frame. It's sort of cut off because I had the developer tools docked. If you have the developer tools separated and external, you'll get the full view and it looks nicer. But I use this all the time to create screenshots inside of a device to put into a PowerPoint. But you don't have to add that device frame. So it can be useful if you want to take a screenshot of a map to put into a PDF or some other report for your boss without opening Snagit, or on a Mac we have easy ways to do screenshots too. But I think that's a nice, useful tip, at least for me. Okay, let's go. The other thing I wanted to show you is if you're debugging remotely, if you're debugging with Android on Chrome or Firefox or iOS on Safari, I have my phone connected through the cable, and I've given permission to my phone to be debugged this way. So I can come here to develop. I can go to my phone, which is called Wildness. For some reason, I can't even remember why.
What's it called?
Wildness. And if I have it open, I can see the websites that I have open on my phone. So I have Esri.com open on my phone. And now I'm in the debugging environment, and I'm actually debugging Esri.com. This is not going to be easy to see, but if I hover over some element, it's going to show me which element I'm hovered over on here. I can set breakpoints. I can look at network traffic and all of that in a nice big environment instead of trying to figure out what's going on my phone. So I use that frequently too. And let's see, I think that might be, one other thing I wanted to show you is let's get this off. The settings, so a lot of the browsers have additional settings that you can use. So here are the settings in Chrome. There are a bunch of other things that you can turn on, experimental tools. Some of them are helpful, some of them are not. I think it's nice to come in here on a regular basis and see what's going on. You can look at experiments. They have some accessibility inspection and some live SAS information that I've been using lately that I find helpful. You can add custom devices to this list, and you can also set preferences for your environment. So it's worth checking out as well as the developer tools, the preferences, or the settings section for those dev tools to see if there are additional features that you can turn on and that might be useful. All right, and I guess maybe we have like 2 minutes for questions. If you guys could fill out the survey, that would be great. We always want to make it better. If you have questions or if you have a tip that you find useful that you want to share with us, that would be helpful too.